BBC Radio 4 Longwave is gone, and Droitwich, Westerglen and Burghead silent, and the argument for shutting them down sounded simple. The system was old, it was expensive, technology had moved on. Nobody needs enormous broadcast transmitters anymore. But while Britain was preparing to retire Longwave, something very different happened on the other side of the world. In North Queensland, Australia, a massive medium wave transmitter was rebuilt. A 50,000 watt AM transmitter feeding a tower 236 metres tall. That's about 23 metres taller than the famous Witchbolt masts at Droitwich. And there's something else at the same site that makes this story even more important. I'll come back to that. Near Brandon, about 80 kilometres southeast of Townsville, ABC North Queensland broadcasts on 630 kHz AM. And when BAI Communications replaced the old mast in 2020, it described the new structure as the tallest in its network. So while much of the world was talking about closing AM and long-wave infrastructure, Australia had just rebuilt one of the biggest AM radiators in the country. So the question has to be asked, why? Because in the right place, the technology still makes complete sense. At 630 kHz, the wavelength is about 476 metres. A half wave is about 238 metres. The Brandon mast is 236 metres tall. So it's almost exactly a physical half-wave radiator. And at these frequencies, the tower is not simply holding up the antenna. The tower is the antenna. The previous mast, built in 1959, was shorter, at around 198 metres. It used a capacitance hat, a classic ABC broadcast design that allowed a physically shorter mast to behave electrically taller. The new mast gets very close to the half-wave height through its physical length alone. Feed that with 50,000 watts on 630 kHz, and the result is serious coverage. I live in Townsville, about 80 kilometres away, and the signal does not merely arrive, it absolutely booms in. You could easily believe you're listening to a strong commercial AM station transmitting from the middle of town. And this is where the comparison with BBC Longwave becomes important. You see, Longwave made sense in Britain. At 198 kHz, the wavelength is more than 1.5 kilometres. Longwave ground waves can cover huge distances, and the United Kingdom is geographically compact. Australia faced a different problem. Our population is spread across a massive continent. One Droitwich-style transmitter was never going to be the complete answer, so Australia used high-powered medium waves to cover major regions, and shortwave to reach the remote interior, the Pacific, and the wider world. And we now come to the other part of Brandon that I mentioned earlier. It was never merely a medium wave site. Brandon was also a Radio Australia shortwave transmitting station. Its curtain arrays were built to throw signals towards Papua New Guinea and across the Pacific. The 630 kHz AM service covered North Queensland through medium wave ground waves. The shortwave transmitters used the ionosphere to cover thousands of kilometres. Together, they formed an extraordinary broadcasting asset. That was not a handful of old radio blokes indulging in nostalgia. It was practical engineering, and it still is in 2026. North Queensland has long roads, vast open country, cane fields, coastal communities, and remote properties. It also has cyclones, floods, crocodiles, and communities that can become isolated very quickly. When everything is working, an app on your mobile is convenient. When everything stops working, a 50,000 watt AM stick becomes pretty damn important. That's why calling this technology obsolete completely misses the point. Old does not automatically mean obsolete. FM is old technology too. It dates back to the 1930s. So when ABC in Perth, Western Australia moved from 720 kHz AM to 102.5 MHz FM, I could understand the decision. FM suited the metro coverage requirement and delivered cleaner audio. But the new service is still rated at up to 100 kilowatts of effective radiated power. In other words, old school broadcast muscle. So this is not AM versus FM, it's not longwave versus shortwave, and it's not old technology versus new technology. The question is much simpler. Does the infrastructure still solve the problem? In the United Kingdom, I believe BBC Longwave still solved the problem. In North Queensland, 630 kHz AM clearly still solves the problem. And across the Pacific, Radio Australia shortwave still solved the problem. In fact, I'll go further. From a broadcasting and resilience perspective, I believe shortwave still deserves to be reconsidered as part of Australia's wider communications mix. Put those RF flamethrowers back on the air, because this is not about giving radio enthusiasts something interesting to tune into. It's about looking after our mates abroad. When Radio Australia left shortwave, Australia did not merely close a radio service, we lost a crucial asset. And once facilities like these are dismantled, they're extraordinarily difficult and expensive to recreate. That's why the reaction to the BBC Longwave closure was so emotional for a lot of people. When broadcast infrastructure disappears, we lose more than the frequency, we lose reach, redundancy, independence, and the ability to put information directly on the air across huge distances without an app, a login, a mobile tower, or an internet connection. That's why Brandon may still be one of the most important broadcasting sites in Australia. Its shortwave capability connected Australia with the Pacific, and its 630 kHz AM transmitter remains the counter-argument to the BBC Radio 4 longwave closure. Standing right there in the paddock, 50,000 watts. And proof broadcasting infrastructure is not obsolete just because it's old. Sometimes old technology survives for one very simple reason. It still does the job. I'm VK4KWM. This is Real Ham Radio.